All right, good afternoon, students. Welcome back to our Summer Undergraduate Research Program. This is our last workshop for the summer, and today's workshop is on the topic of the difference, of writing a personal statement versus a statement of purpose. And we're very lucky to have Michelle Luna, who is a fifth-year PhD student studying in the psychology department. And I'll let her introduce herself and her research and her faculty advisor. And she works at the UCLA Graduate Writing Center, and she specializes in teaching peers and undergraduates how to improve their writing and all about the writing process. And so today's workshop, again, she's going to emphasize some key differences between writing a personal statement, which all of you are familiar with because you wrote one to apply to get into UCLA as an undergrad, and another statement called a statement of purpose, which is more geared towards applying towards graduate school. So with that, let's give Michelle a big warm welcome and round of applause. Thank you, Michelle.
All right, hello everyone. So yes, my name's Michelle. I'm in psychology, a fifth year. I do language development work with preschoolers, and I work with Dr. Catherine Sandhofer over there. Also part of the Writing Center. I see a lot of personal statements actually. Right now we're seeing a lot of residency personal statements for people just finishing up dental school and medical school actually. So personal statements across the board. You won't be finished writing even though you wrote one for UCLA. So yeah, I encourage you, if you'd like to turn on your cameras, it helps me gauge people's understanding. And if not, you don't have to, obviously. But if you're asking a question, you can either interrupt me, so you can unmute yourself if you're asking a question, or you can ask it via the chat. I have it open. So if you have any questions along the way, please use either of those forms to ask the question. Okay, so writing personal statements and statements of purpose. What we're going to cover today are, first, we're going to start with our reader expectations. But then we're going to move on to the genre and purpose of both of these statements, the structure of them, what type of content you should be putting in them, other possible things you should consider or challenges you may want to overcome, and then application-specific concerns. So I know that most of you are pretty early on in your undergraduate careers, so you may not know yet what kind of personal statements you will be working on. But just know that personal statements are a requirement of a lot of different things. They are requirements of fellowships, sometimes even some smaller grants that just exist out in the world that people just give money to, right? Sometimes it could be $500, $1,000 grants, and sometimes these are open to undergraduates to do like individual research. And a lot of those times, those require personal statements. Obviously, PhD applications, and then later on, if you continue on to postdoctoral applications, sometimes those also require statements of purpose. So, So we're going to start off with reader expectations, the audience. So one thing you have to ask yourself is, what is the audience value? Once you know who the audience is, that's going to affect the content and the tone of your statement, whether it be a personal statement or a statement of purpose. You should also ask yourself what can be assumed as common knowledge. So once you know who will be reading this, you'll know the level of detail and jargon is what the level of detail and jargon is appropriate. And once you know what the people reading your personal statement care about, you'll know what to include and to demonstrate. So for example, if you're applying to a PhD application to an expert in a subfield of engineering, you probably won't want to explain some terms that are just known in the field, right? Some basic terms. So when I applied to work with my advisor who studies language development, I didn't have to define language development. So the first thing you have to do is, one, who is going to be reading this? And then you can find out what level of knowledge I need to include. For fellowship applications, you might want to talk a little bit more about the terms in your field, especially if the person reading it is just somebody who's donating money. Then they'll want to know a little bit more about what it is you're doing and how can they understand your work. So knowing the audience is the first thing you should do. Some frequently asked questions that we get is, one, how personal is the personal statement? And two, what is the personal statement versus the statement of purpose? Is there a difference? So you have to use your audience as a guide to figure out the tone to strike in terms of personal versus professional. So when you're asked to write a personal statement, that usually means, one, how has your life led your desire to apply to whatever you're applying to, fellowship or a program? And two, how are you qualified? A statement of purpose, on the other hand, is more about what will you do in our program and how are you qualified to do it? So which one you answer will totally depend on the prompt. So looking at the prompt and seeing, one, do they want more of a personal story, like what aspects have influenced my decision to get here? And what will I do once I'm here? Or two, more about what makes you qualified to be part of the program. Okay, so the prompt. So two things you want to consider is, one, the actual text of the prompt. It's interesting how many times people come in to show me a personal statement and actually don't bring me the prompt. And that's the first thing I ask for, because I cannot give any advice without actually seeing the prompt. I use the prompt to help me guide in the criticism, the constructive criticism I will be giving the writing client. And then so the second thing you should consider is knowledge about the application process. So the prompts can be your best friend because it kind of tells you what the reader and the audience expects your document to cover. Sometimes though, prompts can be poorly written. So I've seen some prompts that are very vague that just say like, why do you want to apply to this program, right? How do you even start? Others are so specific, they offer like 20 different questions that you could answer. And so students then are tempted to answer all of them. And it ends up being just a list of all of the like answering all of the questions. It's not something you should do. Should always be a narrative, but we'll get to that. So one, always look at the prompt. And then two, something else you could do is seek out the help of other students who have gone through the process of this specific either program or fellowship you're applying to, and see if you can look at their personal statements or statement of purpose that they wrote. So looking at other examples is always a great way to help you interpret the prompt. Okay, so here's a sample prompt. I'm gonna read it, and then I'm gonna ask your help to determine whether it's a personal statement or a statement of purpose. And you can use the chat to let me know what you think. In general, state your purpose in applying for graduate study. Describe your scholarly research areas of interest and experiences that contributed to your preparation in the field and your plans for future occupation or profession. Briefly describe experiences that have prepared you for advanced study or research, and provide any additional information that may aid the selection committee in evaluating your preparation and aptitude for the graduate study at UCLA. If you're applying for a research master's or doctoral program, you're encouraged to indicate specific research interests and potential faculty mentors. So what do you think? Personal statement or statement of purpose? Getting some private answers, that's fine. And I'm getting both. So you're undecided. I would say this is more a statement of purpose because of there's some keywords, right? State your purpose in applying for graduate study. And it's talking more about your professional experience. What research have you done? What has your scholarly life been like? So you're gonna be focusing a lot more on your research experience, your academic experience, your extracurriculars, if they're related to your field of study. Okay. For both statements of purpose and personal statements, you should always have a thesis. And this thesis underlying your personal statement or your statement of purpose will be, I am a qualified applicant and would be a credit to your program. So this is always the thought that you should keep in mind as you're applying or writing these application materials. And you don't have to say it explicitly, like I'm a qualified applicant, or I will be, a benefit for your program. You don't have to say it explicitly, but you can use this as the undertone of your writing. So here, when we say genre, we kind of mean, what document is this? And what is it that you're supposed to do? What does the reader expect to find? Where does the reader expect to find? So again, that all comes from the prompt. So the personal statement is always an argument-driven or thesis-driven paper. And this is something that students sometimes miss, is that that a personal statement should have a thesis. So oftentimes, another question we get asked is kind of like, where do I start? And especially if you maybe haven't written a personal statement since you started your undergraduate career, you might not know where to start. So one thing that you could use to start your personal statement is to just fill in the blanks for the sentence. I am the most qualified applicant and the best fit because X, Y, and Z. Then you're going to use that as your thesis statement to kind of fill in an outline possibly of all the points that say why you are the best fit for this program. Now it's important that although you can reuse elements of your undergrad personal statement to your graduate personal statement or statement of purpose, it's important that you've really used the experiences you've gained during undergrad to guide your personal statement for graduate school. So it shouldn't read like an undergraduate personal statement. And I think in kind of starting from scratch and not starting from your undergraduate personal statement, that might be one way to kind of avoid this mistake of just kind of repeating your experiences from before undergraduate school. So again, ask yourself, or say, I'm the most qualified applicant and this is why, X, Y, and Z, and use that as a template to start your personal statement. So you want to demonstrate your qualifications, and we'll talk about how to demonstrate them in a little bit. And you want to demonstrate fit. So you want to say, why am I perfect for this specific fellowship or this specific school? Because you're demonstrating fit, you should have different personal statements depending on what you're applying to. If you're applying to 3 or 4 schools, you're gonna have to tailor it to the different schools. If you're applying to different programs, again, you have to tailor it to different programs. So the fit is something that people often look for in personal statements or statements of purpose.
Can I ask a question, Michelle, before you move on to the next one, which I think this came up in previous EGSA panels and also last night in the Applying to the PhD workshop. Do you recommend in demonstrating fit, is it common, is it okay for students to get so granular that they're talking about a specific faculty member or maybe 2 or 3 faculty members that are doing the research, the type of research that the student would like to work on at that specific school in that specific department?
Yeah, I think yes, especially if if the prompt says to talk about potential mentors. I think it's important to show them that you have read their work, that you know what they're working on, and how you would add to that work. So again, everything is about you saying how you will be an asset to the program. You want them to say, "Oh yes, we for sure want this student. They're going to advance, X, Y, and Z." So when I wrote my personal statement for graduate school, I made sure I read some recent publications that my advisor was on from her recent students. And I made sure that even if it was just 1 or 2 sentences, like I want to add to this research that shows, X by doing Y. Even if it's just a couple sentences that shows you that you've researched the program and that you're already thinking about how you will fit into the program.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Okay. So like I said before, think about 1, what type of fellowship is it, right? who is the person that's funding this? What do they need to know in my statement that they might not know yet? How are you a match for the fellowship's values? So I've seen fellowships that fund sometimes first generation college students or students of a certain minority. Sometimes they fund students that are doing research to help a particular group. So you really want to research the person funding it, look at the instructions, but also if it's an association or a foundation, look at what they do and what they fund, what the values that they care about, and make sure you're matching that in your personal statement. Because if your values match, or if your what you plan to do matches their values, then you're more likely to get that fellowship. Yeah, how does your project match for the fellowship goals? For PhD, it's a little bit different. It's more about what faculty do you hope to work with, and what will your focus be in graduate school? Why is this institution, the perfect place for you to pursue this focus? So you want not only your advisor to be a good fit, but also the institution to be a good fit. So anytime we talk about fit, it's going to be both. Everything has to fit together. So it's, your personal your personal characteristics and maybe past research experience. How is that coming together with your advisor and your institution to, form the perfect, like the perfect ingredients for a good graduate student in the future, right? Again, stop me if anyone has any questions. So now we're going to go into the structure of these statements. Just a basic outline. You're going to start with an introduction. This is usually, and then you're going to have 2 to 3 paragraphs that support the points that you're bringing in your introduction. Then you'll have a conclusion. Just because this is the order of a personal statement does not mean you need to write it in this order. Oftentimes, the introduction and the conclusion are the hardest to write. Especially the introduction. I always struggle with introductions no matter what I'm writing. And that's because the page is blank. I don't know how to start it. I don't know what words I should even put on the page. And sometimes I even want to make sure those words are perfect. So what I do instead is kind of outline the body paragraphs, because I usually have an idea of what I want to include in the statement, even if those ideas aren't perfect or pretty or whatever. Another thing that I do to kind of trick myself into starting to write, because that's always the hardest thing, starting to write, because once you start writing, it kind of starts flowing, is to write or to type in a different color. So I change it from black to like blue or purple or red, because black feels too like finalized. It feels like it has to be perfect, because everything we read is in black print. But if you write in purple or red or something, then it's a draft. It's okay. So I suggest for when you're writing your personal or your statements of purpose that you're gonna have to do is to start with just an outline. Maybe do it in different colors. Get creative with it. You can even do it in text boxes that you can move around. And then later on, once you set the structure of your personal statement, you'll have them in whatever order you want to do them. And that's the other thing too. If you have an outline, don't be afraid to move it around. It's not finalized, right?
I love that advice, Michelle. I just wanted to chime in and say thank you so much for bringing that kind of expertise. Unfortunately, engineers have the stigma of not being good writers. And I've met some engineers that really don't like writing and they want to avoid it as much as possible. But I think I've also met a ton of engineers that are really good writers. And I think what I've seen, a common thread I've seen in all good writers, is that writing is a process, right? And don't expect to write one thing and turn it in. Like, that's just not how writing works. Right. So I love that you're saying, look, start with your key strengths and how you think you're a perfect fit for that faculty member, for that research area, for that department, for that school. Start with those, like your evidence, right? Those evidence body paragraphs. And then later on, you can put it all together, like you're mentioning narrative, put the story together. I think that's your next bullet, in the intro and the conclusion, right? So that really that kind of the beginning of the story and the end of the story come later. Really, what's the actual plot of the story, right? What are your strengths? So I love that you're saying that. And to students, you don't understand, this is sage advice. So please, 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 I hope you're listening. Follow Michelle's advice.
Yeah, I know that, I mean, I was guilty of this in undergrad too, is writing everything last minute. And I think that's one of the biggest things that have changed from going from undergraduate to graduate is my writing process and knowing that it's a process. What my advisor likes to compare like writing an essay in one night as running a marathon in one day. So if you do it, if you run a marathon in one day without any training, you're gonna hate it and it's gonna be horrible. You're never gonna want to do it again. So a lot of students have this association with writing in general because they usually tend to wait to the last minute and do it all in one night. But the more you practice writing a little bit every day, and you could start with your statement of purpose as a way to do this is, write a sentence, write two sentences each day. And then you'll see that if you write a little bit every day, it'll be a lot easier in the long run. And I wish someone had told me this in undergrad. So I hope you'll actually start practicing this because it'll help you for graduate school. Not just the personal statement, but just all the writing you have to do. Okay, so yes, you want to, once you have a kind of an outline, you're going to use that outline to start identifying the purpose of each paragraph. Now, another thing to remember is that each paragraph should only have one main point. This helps with the reader understanding your personal statement. If you start filling in the paragraph with a lot of points, the reader's going to get confused and say, well, what are they even trying to tell me with this paragraph? So 1 point per paragraph. And then it should be filled with examples that illustrate that point. You want to create a story. You don't want to just have a list of I've done this and I've done this and I've done this. Instead of and I'm going to talk about this later, but instead of telling them what your skills are, you're going to want to show them what your skills are. And then in terms of organization, there's three main types of personal statements that we see. We see chronological, which we'll go into what all of these mean, thematic or order of importance, and then specific pieces of prompt. So first, the prompt-driven one. Usually this follows the prompt very closely. So there's an introduction where you have some start to whatever theme you want to have in your personal statement. Then it goes a little bit into into your personal narrative. So what personal experiences have led you to applying to this fellowship or this PhD application. Now the personal narrative will be different depending on whether it's a personal statement or statement of purpose. If it's a personal statement, then that'll be a little bit more about your personal experience, obviously, but your personal narrative in a statement of purpose will be more about your research experience, your professional experience. Then you might talk about a project description, right? If you're proposing that you want to study something in graduate school, you're going to want to talk about that a little bit more. Sorry, there's ambulances going by.
No worries. They've heard all sorts of things coming out of my house too. So it's the new normal with the pandemic, right? So my dog barks pretty much every session I host. So no worries, Michelle.
Okay, then you're going to talk about possible future goals. And this could be as far as, I want to be a professor, or I want to be a researcher. So as far as you can think of, you could talk about that as long as you fit it into what you're going to gain in graduate school or maybe the fellowship. And then conclusion, we'll talk about this, but if you started with like a little story at the top, you can come back to it in the conclusion, or you can kind of end it with your future goals as well. Now, institutional and I would say advisor fit can either be its own section where you have one section saying, this is how this school fits, this is how I fit with my advisor, or if you want to embed it throughout, I've also seen that. Either way works as long as fit is in there somehow. Chronological order is obviously by time. So you might start with what first led you to start thinking about the field, and then ways in which you pursued that interest in college, or extracurricular activities if you did any, and then afterwards, how will you be a fit for the new program you're applying to. So this is, I would say, one of the more common ones I've seen. People like to write in chronological order because that's how they kind of think about their life experience. And then thematic. So this is the one where if you do that bullet point list and you kind of start adding experiences that fit each of the qualities you wrote down, you can do more of a thematic organization because it won't necessarily have to be chronological. For a thematic organization, again, you're going to start with introduction. You might talk about your interest in the field, where it started, and your future plans. Then you could talk about what passions you have, whether that be research, teaching, or maybe other aspects of the field. And then you can end it with your research experience and your future plans, or any other thematic organization that makes sense for your experience. So this is the structure is gonna come out after you've written some outline down. I wouldn't try to pick a structure before I start writing. I would start writing first and then later on see what structure will best fit the outline points that I've already written. All right. So then we're going to go into the content of all the parts. And again, if you have questions, let me know. Okay. So for the introduction, what you want to do is establish your unique perspective or voice. Get the reader's attention and set up the rest of the statement with a roadmap. So students often use a hook for statements of purpose or personal statements. They're definitely not necessary. I've seen successful personal statements that don't have this like really intricate hook of how things have inspired you. And a lot of times students get stuck on making this perfect hook. So I just want you to know that it's not necessary. You don't have to be super creative with this. But you want to start off with something that's authentic to you. And your authenticity is going to come out in your introduction. So, be honest. Why do you want to apply to this? Ask yourself this. Why do you want to apply to this program? What do you want to do? What makes you excited to think about when you're applying to the program? What research makes you excited, right? So if I give a personal example, sorry that it's not engineer related, but so I wanted to study language development because I learned English when I was 6 and I learned French when I was 14. And my experience in learning those both languages was completely different at 6 versus at 14. So I started asking why did it feel so different? What does that tell me about language development? And in addition to that, when I was taking psychology courses, I was asking myself very similar questions when I was reading the literature. So I incorporated aspects of that into my statement of purpose for UCLA. So the first step actually in writing your personal statement for writing your introduction might be, you reflecting on what is truly driving your passion behind this field. And why do you want to continue? Why do you want to invest 5 to 6 years in something, right? Something you don't want to do is use cliches or gimmicks. So if you start off with a cliche, that's usually something that everybody could use, and something that everybody can use is never good to have in a personal statement or statement of purpose, because that takes away the personal aspect of it, right? If it's a cliche that everybody could use, then it's no longer personal to you. So that's something that I've seen. Yeah.
I'd like to add to that, Michelle, just because there's an engineering perspective here. I used to be a reader for the School of Engineering admissions process, and the most common cliche that we hear from engineers in their personal statements or statements of purpose is really like, I like to solve problems, right? Or I fell in love with math, or I took apart a computer, or I like to build things and I was, use Legos. And so these cliches, although it's true, they apply to almost all engineers. I think to Michelle's point, I just want to stress that you really need to be specific with your personal motivations beyond that surface level, interest that other engineers have. So what specific kind of problems do you want to solve? What specific things do you want to build? what specific research do you want to do to solve the world's problems, right? So I like that Michelle brought this up, and I just wanted to kind of double down on it because I've read a lot of these engineering cliches that, you know, frankly, it gets old. It's like, okay, well, how are you different from every other engineer that I'm reading? So I just wanted to kind of jump in on that. Thanks for letting me say that,
Yeah.
Michelle.
Yeah, I'll tell you, as I'm reading medical residency programs, one of the things I read the most is I want to help people. And it's kind of like, well, yeah, that's why you're a doctor, right?
Yeah, it's like
So
join the club, right? Like everybody
yeah,
does.
right. I think that's like the point of research. But anyway, so, that's something that I tell them too is, get personal. And personal doesn't mean like oversharing personal details. It's like, in your own experience, what has, spiked your passion for this? What is driving you to do this long, arduous process of a PhD, right? Right now, I'm working on a 100-page grant for NIH funding. And if I wasn't driven by some sort of passion, then, I wouldn't be able to write this grant. So really think about what is driving your passions for this. Okay, so evidence. So now you have your introduction, or maybe you work on your introduction later, but you have your key points that you want to talk about. Maybe you want to talk about your ability, I don't know too much about engineering, but maybe your ability to program, or the ways that you'd like to solve problems, or maybe your interpersonal skills for managing a team, or whatever it is. Now you want to have evidence to back up these claims that you're making in the topic or in the body paragraphs. So for each main point, you should ask yourself, is it backed up with an example? Are the examples specific? So if you're talking again about maybe a time that you built a computer, I'll probably guarantee you that a lot of your classmates have built a computer. So make it specific to you. What specific aspects of the computer building were challenging? How did you overcome those challenges, right? Yeah, make it specific to you and your experience. Do the examples show rather than tell? So show, don't tell is super important. And telling is something that a trap that a lot of people fall into. So you want to make your statement very clear, very specific, and very memorable. And you can do this by 1 or 2 illustrative anecdotes. So show us how you solve the problem instead of saying I have great problem solving skills, right? Show us an example in which you did solve a problem and how you solved the problem. So that's going to be way more effective than you just giving a list of all these things like I'm organized, I'm flexible, I have great interpersonal skills. Because if you read a research article, they're going to have citations. So your examples are kind of like your citations to back up your claims about yourself.
Michelle, do you mind if I add something?
Mm-hmm.
Just because I've been harping on this throughout the summer. And for students, like this summer research program has been some very like important experience. If you fall in love with research and you decide to pursue a PhD and write a statement of purpose, this program and this experience and the obstacles you've had to overcome, especially doing remote research, your perseverance to solve to be a persistent problem solver. And that's why I had you or asked you to write weekly reflections, because you can look back and read those weekly reflections on what you were able to accomplish each week of the 10-week or 8-week program. And that becomes your evidence, right? That is the content that you're going to fill in to show, rather than just say that you're a persistent problem solver, or that you can approach a problem from multiple perspectives and eventually find a solution to it, right? Like now you have a specific examples of doing that. And so, and not to say, that this is the only experience you're going to have by the time you graduate and apply and write a statement of purpose, but this can be a starting point. And so I just wanted to chime in because I think what Michelle is telling you is excellent advice. So I just wanted to double down on it.
Yeah, I really like that idea of writing reflections every week. And it might be something that you all might want to carry on in your undergraduate career. Maybe write a little summary after you've taken a class that's related to the graduate school that you want to go to, or after an extracurricular experience, right? Just to write down maybe something memorable that happened, because you're gonna forget. If there's anything I know about learning and memory, is that people forget things very quickly. So I really do like that idea. And something that we use as graduate students are academic journals, is what we call them. And we usually use these to kind of write down research ideas that we have, or if someone tells us like a literature in passing, we keep these. So you starting your academic journal early on with reflections like these, I think will be helpful, not only to like keep track of like possible research ideas that you're thinking, but also to kind of reflect on your experience a little bit more. I'm going to take that for future advice. And then finally, does each example contribute something substantive and unique? So sometimes people fall into the trap of repeating themselves, or having a second experience that says the same thing as the first experience. So what you want to ask yourself once you have written it, so this is more of you revising it, is for each paragraph, what is the main point of this paragraph? And am I saying something that's adding to the previous paragraph, or is it repetitive? And if it's repetitive, then maybe that's a place you can start cutting if you're, over the length. Okay, and then finally for closing, you want to briefly restate your main argument. And remember, your main argument is, I am a good fit because X, Y, and Z. Don't use the same words. Do it in, new words, but have that sentiment that the program or the fellowship should know, like, we really want the student because of these reasons. You should address possible future plans and career goals. You could talk about research implications and significance. So if you're planning particular research, why is it important that we research this, right? And this shouldn't be one of the most common reasons that I see that people back up research is, well, it's never been done before. And that's a very, very weak implication of research, or a weak reason to do research. There's plenty of things that haven't been researched, but we don't need to research everything in the world, right? So you want to really guide your research implications by, how will this, improve the field of engineering, or some other, aspects of policy or education or whatever it may be. And if you start with the story, which some people do for personal statements, you want to end it or close it. You can come back to it. And it'll depend on what type of story you start off with. But again, it's not necessary to start with the story. As long as you're being authentic to your experience, then you shouldn't need one if you don't have one. Okay. So other things to consider are context. So you want to check if your statement coordinates with the rest of the application materials. So the personal statement or statement of purpose is usually part of a bigger package, right? When you applied to UCLA, you didn't just give them your personal statement, you had your GPA, your transcript, your SAT scores. When you apply to PhD, you're gonna have your statement of purpose, you're gonna have a CV, you might have a writing sample depending on the program. And what you don't want to do is have everything on your CV or resume match your personal statement, right? So you should see how all the components fit together so that you're not really repeating yourself, especially because you're going to have limited space for all of these materials. You're going to want to make sure that all of your documents add up to one clear, cohesive picture of who you are and what skills you bring to the program or the fellowship. And this is also including letters of recommendation. So I know oftentimes you don't really see the letters of recommendation unless the professor gives them to you, but you might want to have a conversation, with them and say, what kinds of things are you planning to include? Sometimes they'll tell you if they're open to it. Like for my grant application that I'm applying to, my advisor wrote me a letter of recommendation and everything is included in one application. So I actually see it and I was able to see what she wrote and then supplement that in my my personal statement that I wrote for this grant. But even if they don't show you the personal statement, maybe they can give you like 3 key points that they're going to talk about. And you can either support that in your personal statement or maybe talk about different aspects of your personality that they did not talk about. And then once you have all your application material, so once you look at your CV, you look at your transcripts, you should see what holes are left or other pieces that the personal statement should fill. And your personal statement should fill in these pieces to make sure that once you have all the materials together, it's again a picture of who you are as a student and what you bring to the table. Okay, so the next thing you should think about are transitions. So when you're thinking about transitions, and this is more later on, once you have the statement written, you're happy with the content, and now you're just trying to make it more clear and better for the readers to go through. So one thing you should think about is what is the relationship between this paragraph and the previous paragraph. And how does this paragraph relate to the main point of the personal statement, which again is, I am qualified for this program because of X, Y, and Z. When you have such a little space to make your point, so sometimes you're limited by a word count, transitions might feel a little bit unnecessary, but they're actually essential in guiding your document to flow logically and clearly. And this could be as simple as, first, first, I am an excellent I've perfected my problem solving skills, and then you maybe give an example of what time when you did that. Second, third, so you can use simple transitions like that to kind of organize yourself. But thinking about transition is something to help the statement be more clear and improve its clarity. Okay, length. So again, length is something that you look at the very end. I never worry about length at the beginning because if I'm already struggling to get started on writing, I'm not gonna impose another writing block to myself, right? So once you get yourself writing and you can do a stream of consciousness, just write everything that you possibly want to include. Then once you wrote everything you possibly want to include, you can organize it thematically. Then once you have the paragraph written, all the paragraphs written and everything you want to include, then you can start cutting down. Once you're cutting down, obviously you want to stick to the word or the page limit they give you. I'm telling you that my advisor involves me actually in the application process for future graduate students. I get to see their materials, and she gets a ton of applications, right? So you can imagine how tired she is reading all these applications, and if she gets someone that went a page over or over the word limit, it's going to be like, she's already tired, and you just don't want to do that to whoever is reading these, right? So stick to the word or page limit. It's going to work in your favor. You want to remove redundancies. So if something in your personal statement is very redundant with maybe like your CV, so maybe you're talking about how you got really good grades or you did this experience and it's outlined in your CV, then maybe you want to remove that, right? Because they can see your grades from your transcript. You don't really need to talk about them. But anywhere where you're kind of being too redundant, I would remove those instances. Remove unnecessary details. So this I've seen a lot in maybe the introductory paragraph. So that's the part where you're kind of setting up the argument. Sometimes if people are starting off with the story about like how they got interested, they go into too much detail, right? So you do want to paint a picture, but not too much of a detailed picture, especially if it's the introductory paragraph. Just going to be a few sentences that start off your personal statement, but it shouldn't be too detailed, too much detail about the particular experience, because it's not really going to be about your skills. It's going to be more about what got you interested in the field. I would save the space for showing your skills instead of just introducing why you're interested. And like I said before, so compare to other application documents and remove redundancies. Some schools, I think when I applied, some schools required 2 statements, and I just had to make sure that both of those statements were not too overlapping with each other. Because if they're requiring two statements, they should probably be different, right? Why would they require the same thing twice? And so I believe, yeah, this is for some graduate schools that ask for more like of a personal statement. They asked for both a personal statement and a statement of purpose. One was more like, what is your research, what do you want to do with research? And one was like, how you got interested in the field. So I made sure that there was no redundancies across those two documents.
Yeah, if I could add, Michelle, she mentioned a word earlier that was um, that really triggered something for me. And there's two key words here. It's supplement and complement, right? So you want the application to be one big narrative, one big story, and you don't want, like she's saying, you want to remove redundancies. You want to make sure you use your word counts strategically, and you want to make sure that everything is complementing and supplementing each other,
Mm-hmm.
right? And those are two keywords I've heard used in the past when it comes to putting together these, full package, complete applications. And Michelle mentioned one of the terms earlier, so I wanted to just bring it up, the second term now.
Yeah, it's good to look at how everything complements each other, because again, everything's a full package. You look at all the components. Okay, so some rules of thumb. So you want to, like we said before, tailor your application to the institution. So fit for your the possible advisor, fit for the institution. You want to present yourself as a professional by outlining, the experiences you've had, but also writing in a very professional way. So sometimes when people start their first draft, they may tend to use a lot of colloquial sayings. So once you're going into the editing process, you may want to cut these or, uh, switch them to something that's more like academic writing. And then triple check the requirements. Make sure that you're answering all the questions that they want you to answer, that you're meeting all the word counts that they want you to meet. Okay, now we're gonna move into genre-specific considerations. So any questions before I get there on anything I've covered? Okay. I also can stick around at the end too if you have more specific questions. Okay, so for PhD applications, you're in your statement of purpose, you're going to have to show adequate knowledge of the field. And this is another way, another thing where if you write these little summaries of the courses you take, that can start building into the knowledge of the field, right? Because you're going to remember the purpose of each course and what you learned from it. You should talk about your research plan. So talk about the possible topic and research questions you want to address. You're going to want to mention possible faculty advisors. Sometimes they ask for one. Sometimes they say that you can work with more than one. So make sure you look into the requirements of the program to see what type of program they are. And then you should also talk about the ways that the institution will support your project and your professional development. So you have to research the schools. What opportunities do they have available? What funding opportunities do they have? What resources do they have, right? Do they have a particular, set of technology that you want to use? So like I know that that UCLA has the IDRA institution that has the supercomputer. So that's probably something that other schools don't have, right? And if you need to have something that processes a lot of data, that supercomputer is going to be a huge asset to your work. So you want to make sure you're going in and doing research about the institution.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that, Michelle, because there's some specific things that students have. I've read students mention when applying to UCLA engineering for graduate school. And this is just advice for all the students. One of the things we've tried to teach you this summer is the interdisciplinary nature of engineering research. That we have an electrical engineering professor in an electrical engineering lab, but their applications for the work they're doing is in biomedical devices, in cancer treatment, right? And so having a world-class hospital, 2 blocks away from the School of Engineering, and access to those clinical trials and those top-notch doctors and surgeons. And so, think about the bigger picture, the application of the research. And that is something that I've seen a lot of students choose to come to UCLA Engineering because of of the things we offer. You know, some schools specialize in nanomaterials, some schools specialize in robotics, right? So you really need to know the areas of research outside of just your department and your faculty, because there are interdisciplinary opportunities there to do research and apply the research outside of the specific, niche that you're interested in. So something to think about. Thanks, Michelle, for bringing that up.
Yeah, for sure. I actually attend a lab meeting in the education department because I'm interested in the educational applications of my research. And she actually has a project with someone in the engineering department that looks at social learning via a robot called Jibo. And so they look at how the little kids interact with this robot to learn new words and all of this stuff. So they work together, engineering programs the robot, and then education is putting in the materials. What are we gonna teach the kids? So yeah, I think that's a great point.
That's an awesome example, because the Graduate School of Education at UCLA is the #1 in the nation, right? So I mean, that's just perfect. So thank you for bringing that example up.
So sure, do research about the institution. You want to see what they have and how your plans are going to fit into the institution. Okay, so if you have a very specific prompt, and some prompts they offer very specific questions, you want to use the wording of the prompt in your personal statement, because the more of the wording you use, the more it's going to seem like it's like you're answering the questions. And this is also advice that you can use when you're applying to jobs. You have to use the wording of the job description in your cover letter and in your resume, because that, again, it shows fit. It shows that you're fitting into the position that they're asking for. It's showing that you're fitting into the graduate program that you're applying to. So again, fit is a huge thing that hopefully I'm emphasized enough. For very specific prompts, the challenge you're going to want to overcome is, how do I address everything they're asking without it feeling like a laundry list of answers? So this comes back to the narrative component. You don't want to just, say you're answering everything. Maybe what you want to do is group your answers into categories and see how they're forming a narrative, right? And you don't, just because they ask for something in a certain order, you don't have to answer it in that order. So instead, pull out the themes that are coming up from your answers and then organize your answers thematically, so it feels like a narrative and not like you're just answering the prompts in order. I think that will show just how much work you've put into the personal statement, and will probably make you stand out, because a lot of people do fall into the trap of just answering, number 1, number 2, number 3. Okay, some additional advice. So don't speak of your achievements as if they were presents or gifts. So you don't say, I was given a scholarship to study abroad. You should really own your experiences and own what you've accomplished. So you want to say, I earned a scholarship to study abroad. So this is something that you did. And then don't talk about your future plans and your aspirations as hopes and wishes. So you want to be assertive, like, this is what I plan to do. This is what I will do. This is what I will accomplish. So the more assertive you can be, the better. A lot of times, and I've also fallen victim to this, is that I don't want to feel like I'm bragging about myself. And that's oftentimes kind of like a downfall of personal statements that are too weakly written, because it doesn't show your skills and your personality, your character. So one advice that I started giving to my clients is, pretend that you are a friend, and that a friend is writing the personal statement about you, or that you're writing this personal statement about a friend. So think of yourself as someone else. How would you talk about that person? Because I bet you that if you describe your classmates' accomplishments, you're going to be way less humble than if you're describing your own accomplishments. So write like if you're writing for a friend. And again, you don't want to seem like, I'm the best and I know everything in the world, but you also don't want to downplay your accomplishments. Own what you've done, and show that, you're proud of what you've accomplished. And, that will also show that you're very invested in the future things that could come from your previous accomplishments as well. So that's all I have. Yeah, that's all I have. Any questions? I'll answer anything that you want to the best of my ability.
All right, students, this is your opportunity. So go ahead and unmute your mic, or you can raise your hand and we'll call on you. Or if you're super shy, you can type out your question in the chat.
Mm-hmm. And you could send private questions too if you want. I'll read them out loud, but won't know who's saying them.
I like to give that awkward moment of silence to entice
Yes.
students to step up.
Yeah. It's
The
actually
first,
been shown in research to improve learning. Yeah.
absolutely. And the first question is always the hardest one, right? The brave soul to ask the first question, and then it's like a floodgate opens.
Yeah. And I will say, like, I'm a first generation college student. So when I wrote my statement for graduate school, I had no idea where to start. I didn't get like a video like this or a workshop like this. So I think it's very cool that you guys are getting this.
Thank you. I will definitely take that compliment for the program.
Yeah, it's great.
So I think if there really aren't any questions, what I'm going to do is say thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you so much, Michelle. I've been doing this for a long time, running these summer programs, and I've had a lot of presenters and a lot of people provide workshops about writing. And I must say that this is the best, or one of the top workshops I've had the privilege of listening in on. So congratulations. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're
That was
welcome.
very well done. I think all of your advice was right on point. And you really went a lot deeper than I think most presenters go on the difference between writing a personal statement, a statement of purpose, and all the awesome techniques that you offer and advice that you offer. And I'm so happy. One of the silver linings of the pandemic is that I got to record this.
Yeah,
So I get to
for
keep your
sure.
video. So I hope I have your permission
Yeah.
to use it in the future, because that was really incredible. Thank you so much.
Yeah, for sure. And I will also add that, don't be afraid to talk to the grad students in your specific program. So that's something that I tell my students that I TA for is, come talk to me about graduate school, come to my office hours, or send me an email. So the graduate students in your field are going to be the ones that know the most, or, the best about what you should be including in these statements or any reservations you may have. And most of the time they're happy to talk to you. Like, I'm happy to talk to any psychology students. Yeah.
Totally. Very true. And
Yeah.
I've heard that many times from other graduate students, especially here at the School of Engineering. So, okay, so I think I'm going to stop recording.